All right, let's dive into this really powerful story and the spiritual framework behind it. We're going to deconstruct Pastor Dalapa Lawal's teaching on how faith and, crucially, what you say can literally shape your reality. So, Pastor Dalapa Lawal kicks things off with this idea that our lives are always in one of three states. You're either in trouble, and what you need is salvation, or you're in tension, and you need peace, or you're in a period of transition, and you need wisdom. Every state, he says, is defined by a deep-seated need. But here's the twist. He doesn't frame this as some problem you need to escape. He sees it as a setup for the supernatural. It's that moment where you're perfectly positioned to need God the most. And, well, his own story is probably the best example of this you'll ever hear. Let's see how this all played out in his own life. His story starts with a crisis that, by any logical measure, was financially impossible. Just no way out. So imagine this. His church's international funding gets cut off just like that. Suddenly, he's staring down a 1.8 million naira rent bill for the year. The problem? His congregation was mostly students. Their offerings for the entire year would only amount to about 416,000 naira. You can see the deficit there. It's just massive. And what's really wild is just how fast this all spiraled. One minute, he's the salaried pastor of a thriving funded church. The next, the money's gone, the landlord evicts them, and all the church's property, chairs, speakers, everything is sitting out on the street. A complete and total collapse. But right there, in the middle of all that despair, after 6 straight weeks of praying, he says something shifted. It wasn't just a good feeling or wishful thinking. He describes it as a clear, authoritative rhema word from God. Just 4 words, I have provided. And that single phrase, he says, just arrested his soul and became his new reality, no matter what his bank account said. So here's the million naira question, literally. How on earth did that simple phrase solve such a massive financial problem? Because the steps he took next, well, they seem completely counterintuitive. Acting purely on that forward phrase, he goes out and borrows 1 million naira, and it's a loan with a steep 10% monthly interest, so it quickly became a 1.1 million naira debt. Now, you'd think he'd try to pay it back, right? Nope. He takes the church's last 600,000 naira and spends it all on renovating a new space, leaving them with absolutely nothing. He was all in, no safety net. And this is the climax. With just 2 days, 48 hours before that huge loan was due, a person in the U.S., someone he didn't even know, felt prompted in prayer to send a very specific amount of money. And when that $3,157 was converted, it came out to precisely 1.1 million naira, the exact amount needed to clear the entire debt to the penny. What an incredible story, right? So now, with that as our backdrop, let's pull apart the principles that Pastor Lawal says were actually at work here. And it all starts with his core idea about faith. He makes this really powerful argument. He says that the faith it takes for salvation, to believe in a God you can't even see, is the single greatest act of faith you'll ever perform. And if you have enough faith for that miracle, you already have more than enough faith for any other problem in your life. He really grounds this idea in the original Greek word for salvation, which is sozo. He explains that sozo isn't just one thing. Think of it more like a complete package deal. When you receive sozo, you're getting everything you could ever need from God all at once. And here are the 5 key components inside that package. According to this teaching, if you have the faith for number 1, to be saved from sin, then you automatically have access to healing, deliverance, wholeness, and freedom. They all come together. It's not an a la carte menu. So here's the mental framework, the actual logic he says faith operates on. It's this progression of trusting the word you heard over the reality you see. He points to Abraham, who was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac. Why? Because he was holding on to God's earlier promise that his descendants would come through Isaac. The only logical conclusion for Abraham was that if God said it, then God must be planning to raise Isaac from the dead. Okay, this next part brings us to the most practical and, maybe the most challenging piece of his teaching, the incredible power of what you say. He shares this, honestly, it's a chilling story from another minister, Kenneth Hagin. This was apparently God's explanation for why a young man died, even though so many people were praying for him. It turns out the man had spent his entire life saying, confessing, that he'd never live to be 40. According to the story, his own words had set a spiritual law in motion that couldn't be reversed. Now, he makes a really critical distinction here. This is not just generic positive thinking. Positive affirmation, like saying, I am bold and beautiful, is something you generate yourself. Prophetic confession, in his framework, is totally different. It's about taking a specific seed word you believe you got from God and declaring that to bring a spiritual reality into the natural world. So how does this actually work? Well, he says a prophecy isn't a guarantee. It's a seed. And that seed needs water to grow. And the water is your confession. Your job is to constantly speak and declare that specific word over and over until it finally breaks through and manifests in the physical realm. So when you put it all together, the central idea is that our own speech sets spiritual laws in motion, for better or for worse. It's a framework that puts a huge amount of responsibility on what we choose to believe and especially what we choose to say. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question to think about.